Recognize Our Power podcast, a podcast for readers, writers, sexual assault survivors, and beyond. I'm your host, Kelly Wallace. Thank you for listening and subscribing. I'm so excited to dive in and introduce you to a wide variety of writers who are themselves survivors of sexual violence. I'm grateful to be speaking to our guest today, Gloria Masters, who is the founder and CEO, author and advocate for all things child sexual abuse. She speaks from 16 years of lived experience and has set up a foundation called Handing the Shame Back, a nonprofit to help other survivors. She has managed to turn the corner of healing into giving back through highlighting the issue of child sexual abuse to bring attention to this silent endemic. She has written 2 books, a memoir on Angel's Wings, My Flight from Trauma to Grace, and the second book is Flight Path to Healing, a guide for child sexual abuse survivors. The intent with her second is to support other survivors in their healing and recovery. She believes there is a way through and wants to help others by sharing what has worked for her. I was a guest on Gloria's podcast, Handing Back the Shame, several months ago, and I'm excited to have her on today. So Gloria, can you share for us a little bit about what your life was like growing up?
Well, yeah, but hey, hi Kelly, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me back on. Really, well, not having me back on, but having me on your show. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too.
Yeah, so look, I'm smiling and happy now. I think I'm more the child now than I was the first 16 years of my life. Mm-hmm. So really for me, I was just not seen as a child. In my opinion, I was an object. Mm-hmm. And that was from both my parents' perspective. So my father's, in terms of he could make a great deal of money out of me through trafficking me and leasing me out to gangs and nightclubs and Freemasons and friends and colleagues, and he made a lot of money. And my mother saw me as an object in that I could look after her. So we know the term parentified child, that was definitely me. I was not seen, I was not recognised. It didn't matter if I had any needs, Kelly, they were certainly not going to be met. So, yeah, that was my childhood for 16 years.
Wow. And I noticed an accent for our listeners. Where are you from?
Thank you. Who's got the accent? Yeah, born and bred Kiwi in New Zealand, so Auckland, New Zealand's at the moment. For us, it's 11:15 a.m. on Friday.
And did you grow up in a rural environment, a city environment? Can you tell us like a little bit about what that was like for you in terms of what part of the country you were raised in?
Yeah, so I grew up in West Auckland, and it was urban as opposed to rural. But back in those days, you had the quarter-acre section, so quite a lot of land with a creek through the bottom of the property. My father was a plumber. My mother was a stay-at-home mum, who then went on and did some other part-time work. So yes, quite an impoverished family, Catholic family, and yeah, did the dutiful church on Sunday, religious schools, Catholic schools, all of the kind of the methodology and the process and the conditioning and the labelling that went with all of that. So on the one hand, I was like 2 parts. Part of me was a good Catholic girl that went to school and did what I was told with the nuns, etc. And the other part was the best child sex slave I could be. So my father's mother and one of his sisters trained me in the art of seduction when I was 5 years old.
Wow. Wow.
And they did that because when I turned 6, I was then seriously leased out to many important men and groups in our country, and they got paid a commission by my father, so money would change hands.
Oh my God.
So, yes, so the intergenerational abuse and trauma was horrendous. So I never had a grandmother that loved me or cared about me. It was always trapped, always deceived, always manipulated and abused. And it was so a lot of money could be made, which it was.
Wow. Did you go to school? Were there teachers who knew, like, did they notice anything? I mean, what was that like for you?
Yeah, so the abuse began when I was an infant and carried on till I was 16. So I that's what my memoir is, that first book. And it went on, and as children do, we don't necessarily talk about stuff, but we show through our play and through our behaviour and through our actions. So in every way I could, I was screaming for help. I was always in trouble, always the naughty one, always attention seeking. And partly I did that at school because it was my only safe place. So I never wanted to leave. And for me, Kelly, at the age of 11, my parents separated. And I was left with my father and my brother for 18 months in his care. And then the horror really ramped up. So there were lots and lots of psychological torture, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and again, a huge amount of money being made. So did teachers notice? Yes, they did. What did they do? What did teachers do in those days?
Not a whole lot.
And they still do. Call the parents in. What do they ask the parent? What's going on at home? What do you think the parents say?
Everything's great.
If they're enabling or they're a gatekeeper, they're never going to speak. Welcome to my mother. If they're the psychopathic pedophile abuser, money maker, never going to speak. So I just became the vilified black sheep.
Wow. So how...
There's a lot more. I've only scratched the surface. I was made to perform in over 100 pornographic movies. Again, made a lot of money out of those. I was leased out of a high class brothel up in our red light district in Auckland, and that was I was chained onto a bed, and from the age of 11 till I was 16, I would spend a lot of weekends in that room. And again, many people made a lot of money out of me through the men that were happy, and women that were happy to sexually abuse me.
Horrific. Absolutely horrific.
But wait, there's more. Satanic ritual abuse, so through the Freemasons as well. Forced abortions on me at my grandmother's hands. So this goes on and on and on. And I'm not saying that to shock you or your audience. I'm trying to shine light on this so that other survivors feel there's hope and a way forward.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and how absolutely horrific. How did you get away from it? How did you escape?
Till the day I was 16, I was I was made to be part of it. The day I turned 16, that was it. And I never saw my father again, ever,
Wow.
once,
Wow.
willingly. So at family funeral, wedding, whatever, he would be there, but I never willingly spoke to him again.
Wow.
Mm.
And so you're 16, and do you continue on with college? Do you go get a job? What's life like for you?
Yeah, a nightmare,
Mhm.
as you can appreciate. So because I've been conditioned to not be seen and not accepted for who I was, which, as we know, all children are beautiful and what a gift, but
Mhm.
because that was never afforded me, I developed what we call a false self.
Mhm.
And so that false self, it took me years to unpack that and slowly meet and greet who I really was.
Mhm.
And that took decades, Kelly. So in the meantime, once I left school and into early adulthood, I just kept on abuse in terms of self-abuse. So
Mhm.
sleeping with any and everybody,
Mhm.
drinking too much, hanging out with, people I shouldn't be. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you, at what point get did you get any type of help or therapy or anything along those lines?
Yeah, look, I repressed it all, as you can appreciate. I had
Yeah.
16 years of horror. So
Mhm.
my mind said no thanks.
Mhm.
It wasn't till I became a mother, interestingly,
Mhm.
that the memories started to flood back. And from that point on, I just went into therapy.
Wow. And
Mm.
can you tell us a little bit about what that process was like? I mean, as I know from experience, having a really good therapist is really essential to recovery. Did you
Yeah.
find a therapist right off the bat who was sympathetic to what was going on, or what was your therapeutic experience like?
Yeah, look, and I've been with many, and to this day, not so much now. But if I need to, I will go and see a therapist.
Right.
Why? Because it helps me unpack stuff that never belonged to me, and so that's why I set up handing the shame back. Actually, because to me, the shame never belonged to us as survivors.
Hmm.
Yet unwittingly and subconsciously, we carry the shame because we know it's wrong, felt wrong.
Right. Right. So take us back a little bit, to you. You have a series of relationships. It sounds like that, um, maybe just that with the self abuse. It sounds like you went and had a child. Were you married at that point? Did you find
Yes.
someone that you trusted?
Oh, no.
Oh no.
No. I pulled in people. We have a template. When we're conditioned as children,
Yeah.
we naturally attract into us that which feels familiar. So I've been married a couple of times, and, with respect, it was highly unlikely I would ever attract
Hmm.
good, loving, emotionally available, um, kind men. Think about it. So,
Yeah.
no. But I'm very grateful. I have two amazing kids who are now adults, and yeah, beautiful,
Yes.
beautiful.
Yes.
Yes.
Um, so can you walk us through a little bit about, um, how did you recover those repressed memories? I know sometimes it just takes something in our daily lives to bring those back. I know you mentioned having a child brought some of those back. What was that process like?
Oh, I to be honest, if I hadn't been a mum, I don't know that I would be here.
Hmm.
The horror of those 16 years came at me in the form of initially nightmares. So
Mm.
I would go to sleep at night, but I was too scared because I'd be woken up with all these images coming at me. And that was really, quite frankly, apart from the abuse itself, that was the worst time of my life. Because I was reliving it and I didn't understand it. And when I took it to the family, I then became DAVO'd, which, as we know, is deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender. So they very cleverly and quickly turned me into the offender by causing them grief by even suggesting anything had happened. So I then started to doubt my own sanity. But the truth was I started getting very visceral, or having very visceral reactions, and tasting and smelling and seeing people come towards me and just going into they're coming to attack me and having to run. And of course they weren't. They were coming to do some work on the property next door on a shared driveway. But, those things you don't imagine. And I quickly learned to trust myself. And, I lost my family quite suddenly, and then my mother 3 more times over my life, because I dared to expose this and keep coming forward with this. Yeah.
Were you an only child, or do you have siblings?
No, I have siblings. Legally, I can't really talk about them. They are in the book, but legally, I don't have permission. I can talk about me.
Totally fine.
Yeah.
So you have a child. Do you continue with school? Do you go out and get a job? What is your professional life like after all of that?
After the memories?
Yeah.
Yes, I had 2 children. Yes, so interestingly, I was drawn to child and adolescent psychotherapy, so I went and studied that, thinking I would be fine. But of course, it was so triggering for me because we're studying child sexual abuse and we're studying behavioural change in children and impact. What was I thinking, Kelly? What was I thinking? Hello. So that was quite traumatic, but I did it. I set up my own clinic and ran that, and that was successful. And then I just got burnt out with it. So I moved into a more professional capacity of working in workplaces and helping people with, communication and relationship, professional relating and that sort of thing.
Right. So talk to me a little bit about how you came about writing your story in your first memoir, or in your memoir.
Yeah. So look, that again, it was sort of not a game of 2 halves, but there were 2 parts to it. The first part was, wow, how cathartic. And I actually made connections, Kelly, that I hadn't previously, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'd kind of, for instance, my father had always been the monster, and I call him that in the book. My mother had always been, just a shame she didn't want me in her life because I was being honest. So I hadn't been able to really quite confront her neglect and abandonment of me. So she's what we call a complex narcissist, wounded narcissist. So I made some really quite telling connections, and that was really cathartic for me. Then the other part, what was I thinking? What triggered, tearful, so traumatized by my story. And the worst was the writing released, but then very cleverly, I thought, Kelly, I'll do an audio version.
Oh, no.
It's one thing to read, but to say it out loud, that was a hard horrible week and put
Yeah.
me straight back into feeling like that child. It was
Mm.
terrible. But I'm great now. It took me 3 years to write that book.
Okay.
And yeah, is it an easy read? No. Will it make you feel good? No. But what it does do is it's truth, and it comes from a place of, hey, this stuff goes on. It didn't just all begin in 2022. And it's also a way to offer vindication and validation to other survivors who think, I can't cope with this. And all I'm here to very humbly say is there's always a way.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, I'm on my 12th year of writing my memoir, and I've had to take like a lot of breaks. Did you find yourself having to take time away, or did you just keep going forward with?
I wish I'd had your wisdom. I was like a truck. I just kept trucking on. But there was a part of me, to be fair. I'd been in recovery from this now for 25 years. And I felt, look, I really wanted to get it out there. And Stefan was actually my very first interview.
Wow.
But look, I guess very proud of that work. And, you know, really it is just to expose what goes on in it. It helps, to me, it's a real living thing on Angel's Wings. And when people see the cover, they go, what a beautiful book. And then they read it and they go, what a nightmare of a book. I've got it here if you want me to show you.
Yeah, show us what.
So this is the cover, Kelly.
Yes, yes.
And I chose the image of an 11-year-old girl.
Mm-hmm.
And you may not be able to see, but around her are angel's wings.
I see them. Yes, yes.
And
yes.
light is coming down.
Yeah.
And it's on Angel's Wings, my flight from trauma to grace. But I love that, because to me that was the worst time in my life, was that 11-year-old and what I was subjected to. So, yeah.
Yeah. What, so you've written a second book, which is a guide to helping survivors. What are some ways that you have found that are helpful, not only to yourself, but are that are helpful for other survivors?
Yeah, so to me, what's really key is the trusting your instinct and valuing what you know is true, because there's a lot of energy put into blocking, stopping, minimizing, derailing, and keeping at distance our truth.
Right,
Yeah?
right.
So for the general population, in my opinion, across the world, they don't really want to know about this, Kelly, because it's uncomfortable. So for a survivor, we find it really hard to share.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you share, people make comments like, oh, do you really need to talk about it? Or, oh, well, that's in the past now. And so we get shut down. Mm-hmm. So as a new survivor, a person who's newly recovered memory,
yeah,
how confident do you think they then are to continue to share?
Yeah, not so much.
So my first thing really to everybody with love is, trusting self. And yeah, the book is actually written, it's a flight path. It's Flight Path to Healing.
Yes, yes.
So it's an aeronautical theme. So you start with a boarding pass, and I allocate each survivor and each reader a boarding pass because you have it. Why? Because you're a survivor. Mm-hmm. So without realizing it, you've earned your seat on the plane.
Very true. Very true. Very true.
And I think too, we then traverse through sections in the book, like what are common symptoms to us as survivors? How can we manage those? Some healing modalities that I can only talk on what helped me, but I chose 11 of those. and give a little bit about what they are and how they worked in my life. Each chapter in the beginning is a theme, and it, you know, as a youngster, exercise and moving my body was huge for me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at the chapter on exercise, I actually have a whole area around, you know, how I used exercise then, and then as an adult when I started recovering, how exercise helped me then. Then I have exercise sections as in to the reader. So things like they fill out some.
Gotcha. Yes.
This is on each of those themes. And then the very end of each chapter, I've created these beautiful mantras.
Nice.
So these are perforated and they're thick cardboard, so people can remove them from the book and put them on a mirror or a bedside table or a driving console.
Yeah.
And it's just a way to reinforce. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then we work our way through the book and we get to the end section, shock horror, which is your flight path. And this is where you fill in your travel itinerary, your travel destination log, and it's this sort of thing. But the way you fill it in, Kelly, is through, for instance, exercise and meditation may have been two key areas of self-help for you. So that goes in your travel itinerary. Maybe for you in your self-awareness section of the book, symptoms that were common to you were flashbacks and hypervigilance. That gets put in.
Yeah.
So it becomes a whole table. And then at the very end, I've created a passport, which is a CSA survivor degree.
Love it.
And again, that is perforated. That is your passport. And
awesome.
Can I read it to you?
Sure.
This CSA survivor degree is what it is. This passport entitles the traveller to live the rest of their life in peace and harmony. This cannot be returned, refunded, or exchanged. The bearer has waited a lifetime for this trip. Then they date it, they sign their name, and they put in the survivor years, in other words, the knowledge of their recovery, the knowledge of their CSA, and how long they've spent on their healing. So, with love from me to all survivors.
That's fantastic. Yeah. What are some, I know you mentioned meditation and mantras. What are some other ways that, what are some other devices or tools that you've used to help on your healing process? I know we talked about therapy. What else?
Yeah. So again, exercise was big for me because I was so often trapped or tied up or locked down. And so for me, freedom to move was always very big. And if I could move, I could run, I could escape, and I could hide. So exercise helped me, but it did more than that. It actually, of course, released the endorphins, which gave me a slightly happier state of being.
Yes.
Exercise was huge for me. Things like study. If I could study as a child, my mind was on that rather than in the now. And so things like a spelling bee was a big deal for me as an 11-year-old, because I could put all my focus in there and hide outside with my list of spelling bee words and who knows. And then again in my 30s, when I started recalling memory, I went back to university, as you know, and studied the psychotherapy. So study was a great healing modality for me.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
And it gave me autonomy over something. So yeah, there's quite a few of those as well, but things like that really help. And look, we're all different. Music's another one. I loved music. Took me out of myself. Could change your mood like that. So yeah.
Yes.
We're all different, and what works for you is fantastic.
Totally.
If it's rock climbing, I won't be joining you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I so often I gravitated towards exercise that was, like running or playing lacrosse, and they were activities that were really in my head. And when I started writing, I had a writing instructor who was like, "You're writing too much from your head. You need to go take some yoga or some Pilates classes that are really going to be about grounding and movement." And due to injuries, that those are the Pilates and yoga are the primary exercises that I do today. So how fantastic that you have these modalities um, to help you cope. And you started a podcast. How long has your podcast been going?
Yeah, so Handing the Shame Back on YouTube began
Mm-hmm.
in January this year.
Oh,
I had one subscriber, Kelly, for about
wow.
6 weeks. Now we're building up to nearly 1,000.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, look, it just takes time, and I moved my ego out of the way
Mm-hmm.
and just give from the heart. And so, look, if one survivor feels connection with what another survivor shares, as in your story, the comments people make or the
Mm-hmm.
solidarity they feel, well, that's so humbling. There's nothing greater than that.
Definitely.
So yeah, it's on YouTube, but it's also a podcast through any of the main podcast providers. So
Right.
yeah.
And tell us about this foundation that you've set up.
Yes, so that got accepted and is a charity here in New Zealand, and it's
Great.
called handintheshamble.org. And yeah, it's really just again providing a place for people in terms of less isolation, but resource and support to help them through their journey. Yeah.
Right. Awesome.
It's not pretending to be anything it isn't. Like, I'm not the guru on you should do this or try that at all. It's more around, hey, here's some ideas on what worked, or here's a blog that may help support where you're at right now.
So people can go to the Handing the Shame Back website and find resources. What else can they find?
Oh, so survivor stories, they can find podcast content, they can find blogs, they can find tips that help support survivors. So if you're a wife or a sister or an uncle or a dad of someone who has been abused, there's a whole section on tips for supporting survivors like us. So
Awesome.
yeah.
What words of advice or wisdom would you give to someone who is really interested in sharing their story and starting to write? Any words of advice that you would give to someone who's wanting to go down that path?
Who wants to write their memoir, you mean?
Yeah. Or just
Oh.
write in general.
Oh, yeah, look, you can't rush it because we're dealing with the very deepest trauma and memory of our lives. So if you feel you've got to get it out in a certain time frame, it won't be for you, because you'll know when it feels right because it's done. But it took, as I say, it took me 3 years to write that book.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could go back and change it now, there's not a lot I would. But if I'd published it when I initially thought it might be ready, I would regret it.
Yeah.
So I think my advice is take your time. Secondly, start doing it. If it's in your head, it's because it's something that needs to happen. So take your time, start with a chapter or a theme at a time, and just trust the words will come the way they're meant to. I highly believe in editors. I had a few editors in this first book, the memoir, till I found the right one.
Right.
Because I'm not an expert in anything. I'm simply a survivor. But what I found was being able to take my work to someone who is a professional meant they could tidy it up or give me some ideas, or, and I changed a few times actually, but I found a wonderful editor who
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And where can people find you?
So I'm at handingtheshameback.org. We have a contact page on there. Also through the channel, I'm one of those people, to me, if you've made the effort to make a comment, I will reply, or I will notice that you have, and I'll love your comment. But anyone, they're very welcome to reach out through there. And you've got show notes you'll put below.
Oh, yes.
Anyway,
yes.
Yes. In terms of the books, they're on gloriamasters.com. They're both in full, all varieties, all versions. So audio, paperback, hardback, and Kindle and ebook.
Awesome.
So for ebook and audio, go to gloriamasters.com. We're cheaper than Amazon. But otherwise, Amazon's got it everywhere as well. So
awesome. Yes.
Can I show you this?
Oh, yes.
Look at that cover.
Great cover. Great cover. How did you decide to come up with that theme?
Well, it's interesting because I don't know. I thought the word flight path kept emerging in my head, and I've learned to trust myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I quite liked that because someone had said, "Oh, you should just call it one voice or one voice." But there's so many million titles with that sort of thing. And I thought, you know what, I just want it to have a point of difference. And to me, we're on the plane, whether we want to be or not, which we've experienced what we have.
Right.
So, and then I thought flight path, and I nearly called it my flight path, and I thought, no, because actually I'm writing this as a guide. So there's exercises to do through the whole book.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I want people to feel it's their book, it's their flight path, and it's a guide for child sexual abuse survivors.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So
Awesome. Well, I'll link in the show notes to all your socials and the website. And to find out more about our podcast, please follow us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, or visit our website, www.recognizeourpower.com. If you liked this episode, please share it with your friends. If you have an extra few seconds, please leave us a review to help the algorithms.